Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. More than 100 days have passed since President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law on December 3rd, an extraordinary move that has placed him at the center of an unprecedented legal and constitutional crisis. Now he becomes the first sitting South Korean president to simultaneously face both an impeachment trial and criminal prosecution. As the Constitutional Court extends its deliberations, Yoon's impeachment case is likely to set a historic precedent as the longest in the nation's history. With no ruling date yet announced, the uncertainty surrounding the case continues to grow. Meanwhile, a court has overturned his detention, citing procedural clarity and concerns over investigative legitimacy, adding another layer of complexity to the unfolding legal battle. To provide insights into these unfolding events, we have invited attorney An Jun-sung here in the studio with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
And also joining us online is Song Se-ryun, professor of law at Kyunghee University. Great to have you, Professor Song.
Happy to join you.
So let's start right away with Professor Song. So the Seoul Central District Court overturned Yoon's detention with a ruling that canceled it, citing procedural clarity and eliminating doubts about investigative legitimacy. How can this reasoning be interpreted legally, Professor?
Well, the decision was made mainly on a procedural ground. It was a procedural victory for the defense team. Gives a justification why you use expensive lawyers. They examined the process with microscopic eyes and found a procedural argument that took actually many people by surprise. What it is was that the detention is usually given 10 days for the prosecution, but during the duration of the detention period, if the court engages itself for review, that time, that duration of review is added back to the detention period. Convention has it that you count it by days, but the court's review sometimes result in how many hours they spend on it. So the ambiguity between whether to use days or hours, the convention has it that we use days so far. But once the defense team raised the issue that if you use the days, there are cases where the detention period is more than 10 days, even with the added hours. So I think that the court was compelled to look at it and say that, well, if it results in more detention days or detention hours, then the human rights of the accused is abridged. So and that procedural ground, they said that the charges were made, the indictment was made after the expiry of the detention days. What was surprising was that when they were talking about the jurisdictional issues of a CIO's authority to investigate the insurrection charges, they mentioned it only because the defense team raised it, and they put it in the decision to say that they didn't have to review it on the merits because the procedural ground was enough to make a decision. But a lot of people saw the little bit ambiguous language saying to see that the court has some doubts or have some serious concerns about the jurisdictional issues. I didn't necessarily read it that way, but people will just selectively read it and understand it the way they like it.
Mm-hmm. So with this latest decision to, release President Yoon from detention, in response to this, Chun Dae-yup, of the chief of the Supreme Court's administration office and also a judge, said that immediate appeal by prosecutors is needed to obtain higher court's ruling. So Attorney An, first, what legal limits exist regarding public comments by senior judges in ongoing cases?
Well, actually, for the question, right? Before we briefly talk about the Korean court system, and then the Korean Constitution vests judicial power in the ordinary court, and also create independent constitutional court with the exclusive jurisdiction over certain matters, such as the impeachment cases against President Yoon Suk-yeol. Right, and then Chun Dae-yup, obviously, he's the Supreme Court justice, right, not the Constitutional Court. Therefore, that he's not a sitting judge of the impeachment case. Means that generally speaking, when you talk about the judge behavior, whether they can have some public comment, anything is related on the case, on the merit. Whether is it this case, is it this person sitting in the case, or actually any impact, or indirectly or directly. However, he's not related, and plus the KCC and then the Supreme Court is separate and distinct court. They're not really related. I mean, so technically speaking, and plus that Constitutional Court is considered higher than the Supreme Court in Korea. So his comment, public comment made by the Supreme Court justice, I don't think there's any legal influence on the on impending the impeachment trial at all. About his comment, I think that his comment was not really personal comment. I think he spoke on behalf of his, the court, right, Supreme Court. Basically, I think Supreme Court tried to get the final ruling on the legal issue, whether or not the detention period should be deducted by day or by hour. Because there's a split opinion by lower courts in several cases, so many people confused on which was right. So it's time for Supreme Court to kick in to make a decision so that we have better consistency on the ruling. I think that's the what Chundeon point.
Mm-hmm. But then, from a legal standpoint, is this procedure that he proposed actually viable? And were there previous cases that were similar to it?
Well, yeah, actually, looking at the Korean criminal court, basically you have a 7-day window to file for the immediate appeal, right? And however, that we have two questions to ask. If you ask that, how many cases actually file? I mean, file for immediate appeal, and obviously it's going to be many cases, but we don't know how many. But the second question is that how many times the court reverses its decision, and due to the immediate file by the prosecutor's office. And according to the press, there has been at least 5 confirmed cases that reverse their position and about the issues. So, and the interesting that the chief prosecutor made a public comment that he had a concern that, and the reason he did not actually bring up the immediate file issue, immediate appeal issue is that he concerned that it would trigger another constitutional debate. Something further, political debate on issues. So, however, based on the press finding and then cases that there is still something to discuss on the issue, and then prosecutor have to answer the question actually, like how we're gonna do it, right? So,
based on precedents, it's not quite likely to be reversed.
Well, it's more like there's the mixed opinion about. Mm-hmm. So some court justice think that this should calculate by day, or some believe that it should be hours. So Supreme Court have to decide it, mm-hmm. make a final ruling for the consistency of the legal system here.
All right. Now, staying with this, Professor Song, President Yoon's legal team argues that the suggestion for an appeal infringed upon prosecutorial authority. Given that an appeal is possible within 7 days, like Attorney An has mentioned, with the current situation, what are the chances that a higher court could overturn the release decision?
Well, a lot of legal questions or debates are unprecedented because of the kind of novel nature. So we don't know what the Supreme Court would say, higher court would just say. Even in this case, the prosecutor's office abandoned the chance to appeal, saying that there are constitutional precedents that say that the appeal would immediately be struck down because that has an effect of lengthening the detention period. Yes, there are precedents, but they are not really case on point because they dealt with the bail issues and the execution of the detention. But at this time, the procedure is a little bit different. So I think a lot of people are now saying is that the prosecutor's office should have filed for an immediate appeal just to see what kind of clarity that the higher court would render. They're blaming the prosecutor's office, kind of interpreting their own position and using it as an authority. I think that the higher courts, whatever the consequence might have been, I think it would have been better to have the higher court consider on the merits and decide on it so that it will be a clear precedent. But we lost a chance. Even for the file of the appeal, the prosecutor's office position is that once you release the accused, it's deemed to have waived your right to appeal. Not necessarily the final position, and that decision has not been rendered by the higher court. So even that is kind of uncertain ground at this point.
Right, so as of now, we've lost a chance for the immediate appeal deadline, right?
Right, that's at least the prosecutor's office position.
Now, shifting to Yoon's impeachment trial, Professor, in previous impeachment cases, such as those of former Presidents Roh Moo-hyun and Park Geun-hye, final rulings were delivered within 11 to 14 days, roughly 2 weeks after closing arguments. Why is President Yoon's case taking longer?
Well, the cases are different by the facts and the circumstances. For example, President Roh Moo-hyun's case was relatively simple. What he said during the campaign, whether that would contribute to the election results, that was probably a simpler issue. In this case, even the President Park Geun-hye's case, the legal arguments were complex, but the kind of public opinions were kind of gravitating on one direction of the impeachment. Now, in this case, the President Yoon's legal actions probably played out on television, so facts are pretty clear, but the arguments are more complex and very nuanced. We're talking about the separation of powers, where the president's power stops, and to what extent the judicial restraint should be exercised or not. And some of the evidences are a little bit contradictory, and we have two trials going on at the same time, the impeachment trial and the criminal trial. Now, we've noticed that several witnesses would refuse to testify in the Constitutional Court because there is an ongoing trial on the criminal side. So there are complexities of the legal arguments and the uncertainties in the witnesses and evidences, and also the country is roughly divided into two, and the political climate is pretty fierce. So I think the court has an incentive to be extra cautious and look at each arguments and each elements very, very carefully. I think that adds time more than anything. So even though we have a pretty short and very public occasion, or the martial law declaration, but what's contained it legally is very nuanced and complex. I think that adds to the time, and that's why we're having a longer period of looking at it. I'm sure we're at the end of the journey in terms of getting the direction, but that's why the courts are meeting almost daily to talk about many different levels and the aspects of the case.
Right, so it does seem like this case, the court has to consider more complex situations. Now, so this final ruling on Yoon's impeachment is closely tied to constitutionality of the December 3rd martial law declaration. Attorney An, what are the key legal aspects the court would need to consider to evaluate?
Well, maybe there's many issues, but two major issues. One is the procedural and substantive issues. For the procedural issues that, for example, then December 3rd martial law declaration, whether they failed to meet procedural requirements such as the cabinet deliberation process. And there's also some different interesting witness comment on the many witnesses on what happens, and they have a different view on the same incident. So the court have to make decision on which one is which. So that's the procedural issues. Also, not only that, the deliberation process, when actually they send, mobilize military forces, was it excessive forces or not? Is there any, is there any need for that, right? And second thing is the substantive issues that under the Korean Constitution, there's 3 cases you allow for the martial law declaration: is war or armed conflict, or the something similar, national emergency. And then the Korean Constitutional Court have look at whether the martial December 3rd martial declaration meet any of the 3 conditions, right? So is there war, or there's the national emergency, something. So interesting about that expression that's called similar national emergency, right? So it means there have to be something like the national emergency, and the court have to make decision on determination on what is the scope of national emergency. And I guess the defense team is working very hard to make enlarge that is the scope of national emergency, but we'll have to wait and see how the KCC come up with their decision on that issue.
So was it really worth it to declare a martial law? That's going to be...
Well, it's qualified to do. It's that you have right. It's not there. I mean, the Constitution, gives the right, the president right, limited immunity. It's not, absolute immunity. It means that certain cases that the court can peer the structure. So basically, what happened was that in certain cases, the president also can be prosecuted, such as the treason case, insurrection. So that's the things that the court would decide on that issue, that whether there was the procedurally and substantively is qualified to do so under the circumstances.
Right. Now, to Professor Song, yesterday the Constitutional Court rejected National Assembly impeachment motion against Choi Jae-hae, chair of the Board of Audit and Inspection of Korea, who was accused of improperly auditing President Yoon's office and residence. Some people argue that the dismissal of the latest impeachment case lends credibility to Yoon's claim that the opposition party was misusing impeachment processes, and others say that each case should be judged independently. How do you view this issue?
Well, each case should be different. We look at each case as kind of a separate world in which we have to make sense out of it. The alleged improper use or abuse of impeachment power on the part of the legislature on the opposition side is a separate wrong. So you cannot make 2 wrongs to make one right. They are separate issues that need to be dealt with differently. There's no "you're bad too" defense. So both sides should face separate consequences. My guess is that voters will probably take the opportunity, opposition parties' obstructionism into account in the next election and public polls. But what President Yoon is facing are strictly legal at this point, one constitutional, one criminal.
So as we await for the final impeachment ruling for President Yoon, if the court upholds the impeachment, Attorney An, what immediate legal and procedural steps would follow for the presidency and government functions as well?
Under the Korean Constitution, you have the 180-day window to re-elect the presidents. So I guess that once that the Korean Constitution decide to remove the President Yoon from the office, and there will be the time started. So time starts. So it's 180 days. It's pretty short time, actually 6 months. So I think the process. In the meantime, that the acting president, and as of today, is deputy prime minister, right? But we have to see what happened to the impeachment trial, on the prime minister. So that's the thing. We have to see someone will have acting president until during the 180-day window.
So I'm curious, is the 180 days going to start counting when the trial is announced that day?
I suppose so, because it's 180 days. So it depends on the law, actually. If they want to clarify, they say it's a day. So they count it from, I think that the day on Judgment Day, they would count it from day 1, day 2, right?
All right, so a presidential election would be expected.
But not only president election have to be be in the office one of the 80 days.
Right,
So,
right,
yeah,
right. Now, as opposed to this, Professor Song, if the impeachment is rejected, would there be any legal recourse for the opposition, or would this mark the final ruling on the matter?
Well, the impeachment trial has the original jurisdiction for the Constitutional Court. That means their decision is a final. There's no appeals process from there. But remember, we have two proceedings, one impeachment trial and the other is insurrection charges. The president usually have immunities from the charges, but the insurrection charges is one of the exceptions. So that will continue. So even if the rejection results in the impeachment trial, probably the opposition party will move on to the criminal trials. That's the legal front of it. But I'm sure politically there would be a lot of different maneuvers that has gone on even before the impeachment trial to go on, maybe intensified because we have seen both sides kind of coalescing each other and the rallying against one cause or one individuals or leaders. So I think that the Korea is looking at more uncertain directions because we have seen not only the divisions in the political sentiment, but the institutions like CIO, the judiciary, getting a lot of hits, and maybe those kind of damages should be addressed in a public dialogues and the political actions going forward. So we're looking at a pretty long journey ahead.
Just a little bit of more question, Professor Song. So if this impeachment trial gets rejected, does President Yoon return right away to office?
Right. He's returned back to the office because that's a single question in the impeachment trial is whether his presidency will stop right there or not. So if the impeachment is rejected, then he's back to the office, no more acting president, and he has the full power. He made some promises as to, when he gets back to the office, maybe the amendment of the Constitution he will initiate, but once he's back, we cannot hold him to the promise because in the past, a lot of presidents have mentioned amendment for the constitutions, but once they are back to the office or once they elected the president, they didn't do anything. That's why we have not had an amendment since 1987. So I don't see anything would be different this time, but we'll see.
So the Korea will watch closely, the nation will watch closely the developments that will come in the next few days. And this will mark a defining moment in South Korea's democratic history, of course. So we'll have to leave our discussion right here. Attorney An and Professor Song, thank you so much for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And that'll be all for us from Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.